Just as the music swelled and all eyes turned to Ziwa walking down the aisle, a sudden hush hit the crowd, because standing at the back was Naso, hands clutching a baby bump. Ziwa's heart didn't skip a beat. She reached into her clutch, but what she revealed next silenced every whisper. As Ziwa stood at the altar, her voice shook a little. Everyone expected her to cry because of the drama, but no one was ready for what she said. She looked around the room, then softly said, "I've known Naso long before I ever met the groom." People started whispering, confused. Then Ziwa reached into her clutch and pulled out a small framed photo. It showed her and Naso smiling together, happy, like old friends. The room went silent. She held the photo gently, like it meant the world to her. "Every Sunday afternoon," she said, "we'd meet at the little cafe near the church. We talked, laughed, cried together." She blinked back a tear, but this one didn't feel fake. It felt like the kind of pain you carry quietly for years. People began to see something different now. This wasn't a bride angry that her wedding was being interrupted. This wasn't about jealousy or drama. This was about something deeper, a hidden bond. A story no one knew was unfolding right in front of them. Ziwa looked over at Naso, who was standing at the back of the hall, her hands gently resting on her baby bump. Their eyes met, and it was clear, this wasn't a rivalry. This was something else. This was the beginning of a truth the crowd hadn't expected. And suddenly, the wedding didn't feel like a scandal anymore. It felt like something real, something bigger than love, dresses, or gossip. It was the start of a sisterhood. Ziwa looked out at the guests, then slowly began to speak again. Her words were calm, but heavy with emotion. She said, "Before any of this, before the dress fittings, the invites, or even meeting him, Naso needed me." People stared, unsure what she meant. But Ziwa remembered everything clearly. That night, Naso had collapsed at home. Alone. Scared. Crying. She had called no one else but Ziwa. And Ziwa had run to her without asking questions. She didn't stop to think about her makeup trial or her wedding checklist. She just grabbed her keys and rushed over. The room at Naso's house had been cold and quiet, filled with fear. Naso could barely speak. She was pale, shaking. Ziwa held her close, whispering calming words, trying not to cry herself. She helped Naso into the car and drove straight to the hospital. No family was there. No man. Just Ziwa. At the hospital, everything felt still, like time had paused. The two women sat side by side, hands clasped. They prayed together through the night. No cameras, no bridesmaids, no flowers, just two women holding on to each other. Ziwa didn't post anything. She didn't complain. She just stayed, quietly helping. Even when the nurses offered her a blanket, she refused. "Naso might wake up and panic," she said. "I'll stay here." And she did. All night. When doctors came with test results, Ziwa was the one who signed forms. When Naso finally opened her eyes, the first face she saw was Ziwa's. By morning, Ziwa had circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept. But she didn't care. She wasn't thinking about her wedding. She was thinking about her friend. As Ziwa stood in front of the wedding crowd and shared this, people were shocked. This wasn't the kind of bride they expected. Most people spend the days before their wedding pampering themselves, taking pictures, rehearsing dances. But Ziwa had spent her nights at a hospital, praying over a friend who had no one else. That's when it hit everyone in the room. Ziwa didn't just make room in her wedding plans, she made room in her heart. Long before her dress was stitched, she had already chosen love. Not just for the groom, but for someone who needed her when no one else showed up. And that kind of love was bigger than vows. The bridal shower was meant to be full of laughter, games, and fun. Everyone was celebrating Ziwa. The room was decorated with flowers, music played softly, and the guests were full of excitement. But things took a sudden turn when Naso walked in. Some people started whispering. A few even rolled their eyes. Someone muttered, "Why would she come here?" That's when Ziwa stood up. She gently raised her hand, asking everyone to stop. With a calm but strong voice, she said, "Naso is not just a guest. She's someone I care about deeply." The groom, sitting nearby, looked confused. He leaned toward one of the groomsmen and whispered, "Why is she defending Naso like that?" He didn't understand. No one really did. But Ziwa just smiled politely, smoothed the front of her jacket, and carried on with the party. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. Because behind all the smiles and photos, there was a truth that only two people knew. Backstage, in a quiet corner of the hall, Naso sat alone. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. Her heart was heavy. She had never felt so out of place and broken. But Ziwa had promised her something, and Ziwa never broke promises. The truth was, the baby Naso was carrying wasn't the groom's. That was the part no one knew. The rumors flying around were wrong. The drama people expected didn't match the real story. Weeks ago, Naso had told Ziwa everything. How scared she was. How lost. How people would judge her no matter what. And Ziwa had listened. She didn't yell. She didn't judge. She held Naso's hand and said, "Your secret is safe with me. I've got you." From that day, a bond was formed between them, not based on pity or gossip, but trust. A quiet, strong friendship built behind closed doors. Ziwa could have told everyone the truth and cleared her name from any suspicion. But instead, she chose silence. She chose to protect someone who had already suffered enough. She knew Naso didn't need more shame, she needed support. So when people stared, when whispers grew loud, Ziwa smiled through it. Because real friendship doesn't need to shout. It just stays. Even when no one else does. Even when the groom himself doesn't understand. Naso had never planned to show up at the wedding. She was scared, nervous, and broken inside. That morning, she received a simple message from Ziwa. It said only 4 words, "Don't come today, please." The message was quiet, like a whisper, not angry, not rude, just soft, almost like a hug. Ziwa had sent it out of love, not shame. She wanted to protect Naso from the judgment, from the whispers, from the storm waiting at the wedding hall. But Naso still came. She stood at the back of the room, holding her baby bump with both hands, her body shaking slightly. Her heart beat so loud she could hear it in her ears. She hadn't come to ruin the wedding. She hadn't come for drama. She came because she had nothing left to lose. And deep down, she knew Ziwa would never truly push her away. What no one knew was that the baby wasn't the groom's. The rumors were wrong. But Naso had kept quiet because someone had told her to. Someone had threatened her, told her that if she ever spoke out, if she ever revealed the real father's name, she would regret it. She had been carrying fear along with her child, and today, it got too heavy. When Ziwa saw her standing there, trembling and alone, she didn't panic. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped forward with slow, calm steps. Her hand tightened around her small handbag, but not for show. It was her quiet way of saying, "I'm ready. Ready to speak if needed. Ready to stand up for her friend. Ready to carry the weight with her." Ziwa walked with steady feet, each step saying a silent promise, "I've got you. You're not alone." She had made that vow long before her wedding day, a vow stronger than anything spoken at the altar. She had chosen to protect Naso, even when people wouldn't understand. Even when the groom hadn't seen the message. Even when it could have turned the day upside down. No one saw the text Ziwa had sent. No one knew about the threats Naso had faced. But what the guests were seeing now, the way Ziwa moved toward her, the calm on her face, the strength in her silence, told a story more powerful than words. It was the story of a woman who chose loyalty over image, truth over gossip, and sisterhood over fear. The wedding hall was filled with whispers, confusion, and wide eyes. Everyone had seen Naso standing at the back, her hands on her baby bump, and everyone was waiting for drama. But what happened next no one could have predicted. Ziwa, still in her wedding gown, stepped toward Naso, not with anger, but with calm strength. Then, slowly, she reached for Naso's handbag, gently taking it from her hands. The guests leaned in, watching every move. Some thought Ziwa would throw the bag or storm out. But instead, she opened it carefully, like it held something precious. And inside, it wasn't what anyone expected. No baby wipes. No bottle. No makeup. First, she pulled out a small ultrasound print, slightly folded at the edges. The image of a tiny baby. She held it up, her hand steady. People gasped quietly. It wasn't just a baby, it was a life that mattered, a reminder that this story was more than just love or weddings. It was about care, about real people. Then, from the same bag, Ziwa gently removed a thin letter. The paper looked old, fragile, almost like it had been written in tears. It had no name on it, but the moment she unfolded it, she looked directly at the groom. The silence in the room was loud. Everyone could feel the weight in the air. A letter meant for him, but unsigned. A message full of emotions, written but never sent. And finally, she reached into the bag and held up a single key. It was small and plain, but somehow, it felt like the biggest thing in the room. Ziwa placed all 3 items in her palm and held them in front of the crowd. There were no words yet, but her actions said enough. People looked around, confused, curious, shocked. Who was the father? What was in that letter? Why was there a key? The questions filled the room like smoke. But through it all, Ziwa remained calm. Her eyes were on Naso, not the crowd. She nodded softly, as if saying, "You don't have to hide anymore. I'm with you." In that moment, everyone saw something powerful. Ziwa hadn't just helped Naso through a rough time, she had carried her. Not physically, but emotionally. Through silence, through fear, through pain. She had held Naso's secrets, her pain, her hopes, until she was strong enough to stand on her own. This wasn't about exposing anyone or seeking attention. It was about love in its purest form, the kind that stands beside someone when the world turns away. The wedding ceremony had reached the quiet, serious moment everyone was waiting for. The guests sat still, phones ready, eyes focused. The officiant smiled and cleared his throat, ready to begin the vows. But just as he opened his mouth, Ziwa did something no one saw coming. She lifted her hand slowly, signaling him to stop. Then, without saying a word, she pulled out her phone. Everyone in the room looked at her, confused. Was she checking a message during her own wedding? Ziwa turned the screen toward the audience. There was a single message on display. It read, "It's not his. It's mine. And I'm so unready." The room went silent. People shifted in their seats. A few guests looked at the groom. Others looked at Naso, still standing at the back. Whispers began to fill the air. The mood had changed. The beautiful ceremony now felt like something deeper, more real. Ziwa's voice was soft but steady as she spoke. "Before I make any promises," she said, "I need to honor this truth." Her hands were slightly shaking, but her eyes were clear. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't angry. She was standing in front of the world with her heart wide open. She turned and looked at the groom. "I still love you," she said gently. "But right now, there's something else that matters even more than these vows." People were shocked. This was her wedding day. A day brides dream about. But Ziwa was ready to pause it, not because she didn't want it, but because someone else needed her more in that moment. She wasn't walking away from her love. She was simply saying, "Wait. Wait," because someone she loved was hurting. Someone had trusted her with their truth. And now that truth needed to be protected, not hidden. She didn't explain the whole story. She didn't name names. She didn't point fingers. She just stood there, holding a message that spoke volumes, a message from Naso, a silent cry for help. And instead of ignoring it, Ziwa made space for it. The crowd began to see the kind of woman she truly was. This wasn't a dramatic bride. This wasn't someone chasing attention. This was a woman choosing loyalty, kindness, and truth, even when it meant putting her own special moment on hold. And that's what made it even more powerful. Ziwa's pause wasn't weakness. It was strength, the kind that puts people before plans, love before ceremony, and truth before tradition. The reception was bright and cheerful. Laughter filled the hall, music played softly, and the groom was all smiles. He stood up, holding a glass in one hand, ready to give his groom's speech. Everyone clapped as he cleared his throat and began to speak about love, family, and his beautiful bride. But before he could go further, Ziwa quietly stood up from her seat and walked toward him. The room slowly grew silent. People noticed her serious expression. Even the music faded as attention shifted to her. She walked gently, her white dress flowing behind her. In her hands, she carried something small and wrapped in bubble paper. It didn't look like much, just a tiny package, but what was inside held weight. Ziwa reached the groom and stood close to him. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply held out the small object. The groom, still smiling, took it from her with a curious look. As he unwrapped it, the room watched carefully. Inside was a plain key. Just one key. The groom's smile disappeared. He stared at it, confused at first, then slowly, the meaning started to hit him. Ziwa leaned in and whispered something only he could hear. "She deserves your strength too." That was all she said. He didn't respond. He just stood there, frozen, holding the key, his mind racing. The cameras around the hall clicked rapidly. Guests leaned forward, whispering to each other, wondering what was going on. Some thought it was a gift. Others guessed it was a message. But Ziwa's face said it all. This wasn't a joke. The groom looked around the room, searching for answers, then looked at Ziwa again. Her eyes weren't angry, they were clear, strong, and honest. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. She was trying to remind him. That key wasn't just a key. It was a symbol. A piece of Naso's story. A part of the pain she had carried alone. And now, Ziwa was passing it on, not to shame him, but to say, "It's time you show up too." The groom didn't know what to do. For once, he had no words. And in that moment, everyone could see, This wasn't about just a bride and groom anymore. It was about truth. About facing it. About sharing the weight of it. Ziwa had shared her strength for long enough. Now, she was asking him, quietly, calmly, to carry his part. The room was still filled with tension after the groom had received the key. Everyone watched closely, unsure of what would happen next. But before anyone could speak or move, Ziwa did something that caught everyone completely off guard. She slowly walked back to the center of the room and stood tall, her face calm and clear. Then, in front of everyone, she reached into her small clutch again. People held their breath, waiting to see what she would pull out this time. Slowly and carefully, Ziwa brought out 2 shiny gold wedding bands. The lights in the hall made them sparkle in her hands. The crowd gasped. 2 rings, not 1. Everyone's eyes widened. Whispers started rising across the room. Why 2 rings? What did this mean? Ziwa looked around at the faces staring at her, some confused, some emotional. Then she spoke, not loudly, but with deep strength in her voice. I didn't marry just for the celebration, she said. I married for love. But today, I'm also choosing loyalty. People didn't know what to say. Her words weren't just for her groom anymore, they were for everyone. And especially for Naso, who was still standing quietly at the back. Ziwa held up both rings for everyone to see. This one, she said, lifting one of them slightly, is for the love I promised to my husband. Then she held up the second ring. And this is for the loyalty I promised to a friend who stood in storms no one saw. Some guests began tearing up. Others nodded slowly, touched by her words. No one had expected this kind of heart, this kind of strength, from a bride on her wedding day. She wasn't asking for attention. She wasn't trying to steal the moment. She was sharing it, giving it meaning, giving it heart. Ziwa was reminding everyone that love isn't just about couples standing at an altar. Sometimes, it's about standing beside someone when they have no one else. And in that moment, the crowd began to see her differently. She wasn't just a bride anymore, she was a woman of grace, of courage, of deep loyalty. Tears rolled down faces. Cameras flashed. Some guests reached for tissues. The energy in the room had shifted. Ziwa's simple act, pulling 2 rings from her bag, had changed everything. What was supposed to be just a wedding turned into something more powerful, a story of love, friendship, and standing by someone even when it's not easy. The music started again, soft and slow, but this time it didn't feel like a wedding song. It felt deeper, more meaningful. All eyes turned to the aisle once more, expecting to see Ziwa walking alone, returning to her groom. But what the guests saw next left them speechless. Ziwa wasn't walking alone. She held Naso's hand tightly, and the 2 women walked together, side by side, down the aisle. Ziwa, dressed in her white gown, moved with calm confidence. And next to her, Naso walked slowly, her hands gently holding her baby bump, a soft glow in her eyes. She didn't look afraid anymore. She looked like someone who had finally been seen. The guests watched in silence. There were no whispers now. Only awe. Some people cried. Others simply watched, hearts full. This wasn't something they had ever seen before. 2 women, one a bride, the other a woman once mistaken as the cause of drama, now walking together like sisters. Their steps were gentle, in sync, like they had practiced this moment their whole lives. But they hadn't. It was just real. Honest. Beautiful. When they reached the front, they both stopped in front of the groom. He looked at them, eyes wide, unsure of what to say. But they didn't need his words. Ziwa smiled softly at him, then at Naso, as if to say, we're not here for a show. We're here for truth. There was no anger in the moment. No shame. Just peace. The kind of peace that comes when people choose love, not judgment. When they choose understanding over silence. The guests finally began to understand, this wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a message. A message about unity. About standing up for each other. About healing old wounds, even on a day meant to be all about new beginnings. Ziwa could have turned the day into a storm. She could have pushed Naso away. But instead, she pulled her closer. She showed the world that sisterhood isn't just about blood, it's about showing up when it matters most. As they stood together at the front, it no longer felt like the groom's moment alone. It felt like something shared. Something bigger than rings or vows. It was now a celebration of 2 brave women, walking forward not in competition, but in strength. Together. Months after the wedding, the story that once shocked everyone had turned into something beautiful. The videos from that day went viral, not because of scandal, but because of strength. People watched in awe as Ziwa and Naso walked down the aisle together, smiling, standing tall. The internet didn't laugh. It cried. It clapped. It shared. Because the world hadn't seen a bride like Ziwa before. But Ziwa didn't stop there. She used that attention to build something greater. She started a foundation for single mothers, women just like Naso, who had been left to face the world alone. The foundation gave them support, shelter, and most importantly, dignity. And guess who was standing right beside her as the co-founder? Naso. No longer hiding, no longer afraid. She was now speaking to rooms full of women, sharing her story. She held her baby in one arm, and in the other, she held hope for others. Ziwa and Naso became a team, not because life had been perfect, but because they had chosen love over pride, unity over silence. In one video clip from their wedding, Ziwa is seen laughing with Naso during the reception. Both women glowing. Both women celebrated. The caption underneath reads, "She didn't steal my spotlight, she shared it." And that was the truth. Ziwa could have made that day all about herself. She could have ignored Naso, pushed her away, and demanded all attention beyond her. But she didn't. She saw pain in someone else and chose to share the light she had, not out of pity, but out of love. Because real queens don't compete. They uplift. In the final narration of the Foundation's short film, Ziwa's voice can be heard saying, "People say Naso came to interrupt our wedding, but we didn't let it become a disaster. We turned it into a celebration, of truth, of healing, and of real family." And that's the lesson they left behind. When you shine, don't dim your light to make others comfortable. But also, don't be afraid to share that light with someone who's been stuck in the dark. True power isn't in standing alone. It's in standing together. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away in silence. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that real strength is lifting others, not stepping over them. Comment real family if you believe sisterhood is stronger than secrets. Double tap for Ziwa's courage. Repost to show the world, women who stand together, rise together.